the courtroom camera captured the exact moment a 52-year-old billionaire learned that money cannot buy everything, and the look on his face would become the most viewed reaction shot in television history. Maxwell Sterling, the founder and CEO of Sterling Global Holdings, a $4.7 billion empire spanning real estate, tech investments and offshore banking, swaggered into Judge Judy's courtroom wearing a Tom Ford suit that cost more than most Americans earn in a year, a Patek Philippe watch worth $340,000 strapped to his wrist, and an expression of pure, undiluted contempt for everyone in the room. He didn't sit when instructed, he didn't acknowledge the bailiff. He didn't even glance at the woman he was being sued by. Maxwell Sterling believed with every fiber of his arrogant being that this courtroom appearance was beneath him, that Judge Judy was a glorified TV personality, and that within 20 minutes, he would be back in his chauffeur-driven Bentley, laughing about the ridiculous spectacle of being forced to appear on daytime television. What happened in the next 41 minutes would obliterate his net worth, dismantle his business empire, freeze his assets across 3 continents and become the singles most satisfying takedown of unchecked wealth ever captured on camera. Shared over 180 million times, discussed on every financial news network from CNBC to Bloomberg. But here's what makes this story absolutely unprecedented. Maxwell didn't just lose his case, he didn't just face consequences. What Judge Judy did in response to 7 specific words that came out of Maxwell Sterling's mouth was so devastating, so surgically precise, so absolutely catastrophic that by the time the episode ended, 3 federal agencies were already mobilizing. His stock had crashed 73% in pre-market trading, and Maxwell Sterling had transformed from a billionaire into a defendant facing 47 federal charges. All because Judge Judy made one phone call, one single phone call that ended an empire built over 30 years in the span of a single afternoon. Before we get to that phone call and the moment Maxwell Sterling realized he had just made the worst mistake of his entire life, I need you to do something for me right now. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and whether you've ever encountered someone so wealthy they thought they were above the law. Hit that subscribe button immediately because what you're about to witness isn't just a court case. It's a masterclass in how one judge with the right phone numbers can destroy generational wealth in real time. The moment Maxwell utters those 7 words is the moment everything changes, and I promise you the satisfaction you'll feel when Judge Judy picks up that phone is unlike anything you've ever experienced. Stay until the very end because what happens to Maxwell Sterling after the credits roll is even more incredible than what happens during the episode itself. Maxwell Sterling had built Sterling Global Holdings from nothing. Or at least that was the carefully crafted narrative he sold in his self-published autobiography, his TED Talks, and his $50,000 per seat motivational speaking engagements. The truth was significantly less inspiring. Maxwell had been born into wealth as the only son of Harold Sterling, a Manhattan real estate developer who had given Maxwell a $40 million inheritance trust at age 25. Maxwell had used that inheritance to begin acquiring properties in distressed neighborhoods, evicting longtime tenants through aggressive legal tactics, and flipping the buildings to luxury developers for massive profits. By age 35 he had grown his empire to $400 million. By age 45 he had crossed the billion-dollar threshold through a combination of legitimate business acumen, ruthless tenant displacement, and a network of offshore shell companies that he used to hide assets from tax authorities, ex-wives and the various plaintiffs who had attempted to sue him over the years. By age 52, when he walked into Judge Judy's courtroom, Max Sterling was worth an estimated $4.7 billion, owned residences in 7 countries, had been married 4 times and divorced 4 times, had 3 estranged children who refused to speak to him, and had developed a reputation in financial circles as a man who could not be touched by any legal system anywhere in the world. He had teams of lawyers in New York, London, Geneva, Singapore and the Cayman Islands. He had relationships with senators, federal judges and at least 2 members of the Supreme Court. He had donated tens of millions of dollars to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. He had purchased influence the way other people purchased groceries, casually and without thought. So when Maxwell Sterling received notice that he was being sued in small claims court for $11,400 by a woman named Rosa Mendoza, his immediate reaction was to laugh out loud in his Manhattan corner office and then instruct his secretary to send a junior associate to handle it. When his secretary informed him that the case was being heard on Judge Judy's nationally televised show, Maxwell laughed even harder. He thought it would be funny, he thought it would be entertaining, he thought it would be a perfect opportunity to demonstrate his complete dominance over what he called the peasant legal system. Maxwell decided to attend personally, not because the case mattered, but because he wanted to be seen on national television, demolishing some immigrant cleaning lady who had the audacity to sue him over what he assumed was some trivial matter. He told his publicist this would be excellent branding. He told his current girlfriend, a 24-year-old former model, that she should record the episode because it would be hilarious. He told his lawyer that he didn't need representation because the entire thing was beneath him and he could handle it himself. Maxwell Sterling walked into Judge Judy's courtroom expecting a comedy. He left it as the centerpiece of an FBI investigation. And the woman he had dismissed as a peasant cleaning lady would turn out to be the human equivalent of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. Rosa Mendoza was a 58-year-old commercial cleaning supervisor, who had been born in Guadalajara, Mexico, immigrated to the United States legally at age 22, and spent the next 36 years building a small family-owned commercial cleaning business with her late husband Eduardo, who had died of a heart attack 5 years ago, while cleaning the lobby of one of Maxwell Sterling's office buildings at 4 a.m. Rosa now ran the business with her 2 adult children, Miguel and Sofia, and they had built up a respectable client roster of 47 commercial properties throughout Manhattan and Brooklyn. They employed 23 people, all of whom received fair wages, health insurance and overtime pay. Rosa had built her business on the principle that her workers should be treated with dignity. The principle that her late husband had drilled into her from the day they had started cleaning offices together with 1 bucket and 2 mops, back in 1988. Sterling Global Holdings had been one of Rosa's clients for 11 years. Her company cleaned 6 of Maxwell Sterling's commercial properties under a contract worth approximately $340,000 per year. The contract had been renewed 5 times and Rosa had personally ensured that her crews provided exceptional service. Then 14 months ago, Maxwell Sterling had decided to bring all his cleaning services in-house using a new subsidiary company that would employ undocumented workers paid below minimum wage, with no benefits, no overtime and no workplace protections. He cancelled Rosa's contract with 30 days' notice as the contract specified. That was completely legal. What was not legal was the final invoice that Rosa submitted for $11,400 covering the last month of services already provided, which Sterling Global Holdings refused to pay. Maxwell's accounting department sent Rosa a series of letters claiming that the work had been substandard, that there were unspecified damages to property, and that they were withholding payment as compensation. None of these claims were accompanied by any documentation. There were no incident reports, there were no photographs of damage, there were no complaints from any of the building managers who had actually overseen Rosa's crews. The withholding of payment was simply a power move. Maxwell Sterling withheld $11,400 from Rosa Mendoza because he could, because she was a small business owner without the resources to fight a billionaire, and because petty cruelty was simply how he conducted business. Rosa had spent 6 months trying to collect the payment through normal channels. She had hired a lawyer who had charged her $4.00 before telling her that fighting Sterling Global Holdings in regular court would cost her at least $80,000 with no guarantee of success. The lawyer recommended she write off the loss and move on. Rosa had refused. The $11,400 wasn't just money. It was payment for work her crews had performed. It was wages for the people who depended on her. It was a matter of principle. It was more than anything, a matter of her late husband's memory. Eduardo Mendoza had died class Maxwell Sterling's lobby. He had collapsed on the marble floor at 4:17 a.m., and a security guard had found him 3 hours later. Sterling Global Holdings had not sent flowers to the funeral. They had not contacted the family. They had simply replaced him with another worker by Monday morning. Rosa had been forced to clean bloodstains off her husband's uniform, because Sterling's building manager refused to release the security footage that would have shown her exactly what happened in his final moments. Now, 5 years later, that same company was refusing to pay her for legitimate work performed, and Rosa Mendoza had decided that whether she won or lost, she was going to make Maxwell Sterling sit across from her in a courtroom and look her in the eye. When she received the offer to have the case heard on Judge Judy's show, Rosa accepted immediately. She didn't care about the television exposure. She cared that Maxwell Sterling would be forced to appear in person. She had no idea how spectacularly that decision would change both their lives. Judge Judy had reviewed the Sterling Global Holdings versus Mendoza Cleaning Services case file, and what she found made her settle into a state of focused calm that her producers had learned to recognize as the calm before a hurricane. On the surface, the case was simple. A billionaire's company was refusing to pay a small cleaning company $11,400 for services rendered. The legal merits were straightforward. The documentation was complete. Rosa Mendoza had detailed invoices, signed work orders and email confirmations of completed services. Maxwell Sterling's company had no documented justification for withholding payment. From a purely legal standpoint, this case would take Judge Judy approximately 90 seconds to rule on. But Judge Judy had not become one of the most respected judges in American television by ruling on cases at face value. She had her research team dig deeper into Maxwell Sterling, into Sterling Global Holdings, and into the patterns of behavior that had defined his business empire for 3 decades. What they uncovered was so extensive, so damning, and so legally explosive that Judge Judy spent 5 full days reviewing it personally before the taping. There was the matter of 247 wage theft complaints filed against Sterling Global Holdings subsidiaries over the past 11 years. There was the matter of 89 wrongful eviction cases that had been settled out of court with non-disclosure agreements. There was the matter of $2.3 billion in assets that appeared to flow through 14 different shell companies registered in jurisdictions ranging from the Cayman Islands to the British Virgin Islands to a small office in Malta that contained no employees and no physical operations. There was the matter of Maxwell's relationship with a federal judge in the Southern District of New York, who had presided over 6 different cases involving Sterling Global Holdings and ruled in Maxwell's favor in every single one despite a clear conflict of interest. And there was the matter of Eduardo Mendoza, the husband of the plaintiff, who had died on Maxwell Sterling's property under circumstances that had never been fully investigated, because Sterling Global Holdings had paid the workers' compensation insurance company a settlement that included a clause preventing further investigation. Judge Judy had connections that Maxwell Sterling did not know about. After 25 years on national television and decades before that as a respected family court judge in Manhattan, she had developed relationships with attorneys general in 14 states, with senior officials at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division, with investigators at the SEC Enforcement Division, with agents at the FBI's White-Collar Crime Unit, and with a particularly determined federal prosecutor in the Southern District of New York named Catherine Walsh, who had been trying to build a case against Maxwell Sterling for 7 years, but had been blocked at every turn by the very judge with whom Maxwell had a corrupt relationship. Catherine Walsh had been waiting for the right opportunity to act on the information she had been gathering. She had been waiting for the kind of public moment that would generate enough media attention to make corruption impossible to hide. She had been waiting for Maxwell Sterling to make a mistake big enough that the political cover protecting him would crumble. Judge Judy was about to give her exactly the opportunity she needed. The courtroom was filled to capacity that morning, an electricity in the air that reminded veteran production staff of the most legendary episodes in the show's history. The audience had been informed that today's case involved a high-profile defendant, but they had not been told who. When Maxwell Sterling walked into the courtroom, the murmur that rippled through the crowd was unmistakable. Several audience members recognized him from financial news coverage. One audience member, a small business owner from Queens, audibly whispered the words "that man is a monster" loud enough to be picked up by the courtroom microphones. Maxwell Sterling did not appear to notice. He walked to the defendant's table with the casual confidence of a man strolling into a country club, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the polished floor with each step. He set his Patek Philippe watch on the table, where it would catch the studio lights and remind everyone of his wealth. He pulled out a slim platinum cell phone and began typing what appeared to be a text message, his attention already drifting away from the proceedings before they had even begun. Rosa Mendoza sat at the plaintiff's table, wearing a simple navy blue dress and a small gold cross necklace that had belonged to her mother. Her hands were folded in front of her, calm and steady. Her dark eyes were fixed on Maxwell Sterling with an expression that was neither anger nor fear but something closer to determination. She had waited 5 years to be in the same room with this man. She was not going to waste a single second of it being intimidated. Judge Judy entered, and the courtroom rose. Everyone rose except Maxwell Sterling, who continued typing on his phone for several seconds before glancing up with mild irritation at the disturbance. He stood briefly, half-heartedly, and sat back down before Judge Judy had even reached her bench. The bailiff's jaw visibly tightened. Several audience members exchanged scandalized glances. Judge Judy sat, arranged her papers and looked directly at Maxwell Sterling with eyes that contained the patience of a predator that has identified its prey and is in no hurry whatsoever. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Judy began, her voice carrying that crystalline precision that regular viewers knew preceded the destruction of confidence. "You are being sued by Mendoza Cleaning Services for $11,400 in unpaid invoices for services rendered to your company over a period of 1 month. Do you dispute that the services were performed?" Maxwell glanced up from his phone with the expression of a man who had been interrupted while reading something important. "Your Honor, my company has accounting procedures. The invoices are being reviewed. This entire matter is being handled by my legal department." He said this with the dismissive tone of someone explaining basic concepts to a slow child. "I'm not even sure why I'm here. This should have been handled by a junior associate." Judge Judy's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Sterling, you're here because this is the legal venue chosen by both parties through binding arbitration agreement. Now I asked you a specific question. Do you dispute that the services Mendoza Cleaning Services billed you for were actually performed?" Maxwell sighed audibly. "Your Honor, I personally do not handle the cleaning of my buildings. I have no idea whether the services were performed adequately. I assume my accounting department has reasons for whatever decisions they make." The arrogance was so casual, so reflexive, that it took several seconds for the audience to fully process what they had just witnessed. A billionaire was telling a national television judge that he had no idea whether his company owed money to a small business owner, because such matters were beneath his attention. Judge Judy turned to Rosa Mendoza. "Mrs. Mendoza, please present your case." Rosa stood, opened a manila folder, and began speaking in a calm, clear voice that contained 36 years of accumulated dignity. "Your Honor, my company provided cleaning services for 6 properties owned by Sterling Global Holdings during the month of March. I have invoices, signed work orders from each building manager, time logs from my crews and email confirmations from Sterling's accounting department acknowledging receipt of the work. The total amount owed is $11,400. The contract specified payment within 30 days of invoice submission. It has now been 14 months. I have sent multiple follow-up notices, all of which have been ignored or responded to with vague claims of substandard service that have never been substantiated with any documentation. She walked to the bailiff and handed over her folder, which contained organized documentation that any reasonable person would recognize as ironclad evidence. Judge Judy reviewed the documents methodically, her expression revealing nothing. Maxwell Sterling continued typing on his phone. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Judy said without looking up, "I would appreciate it if you would put your phone away during these proceedings." Maxwell glanced up briefly. "I have business to attend to, Your Honor. I'm sure you understand that some of us have actual responsibilities." The audience reacted with audible disgust. Judge Judy slowly raised her eyes from the documents and fixed Maxwell Sterling with a look that should have warned him that he had just crossed a line he could not uncross. But Maxwell Sterling was not the kind of man who recognized warnings. He had spent 30 years steamrolling everyone who tried to limit him. "Mr. Sterling, put the phone away now." Maxwell rolled his eyes with theatrical exasperation, set his phone down on the table and made a show of folding his hands. "There, are you happy? May we proceed?" Judge Judy's voice dropped to a dangerous register. "Mr. Sterling, do you have any documented evidence supporting your company's refusal to pay this invoice? Any incident reports? Any photographs of damage? Any complaints filed by your building managers? Anything at all that would justify withholding payment for services that all your own documents confirm were rendered?" Maxwell shrugged. "I would have to consult my legal team. I'm not familiar with the specifics." "So you're telling this court that you came to defend a lawsuit without any knowledge of the underlying facts and without any documentation supporting your position?" Maxwell smiled the kind of smile that made his 3 ex-wives all reach for divorce papers. "Your Honor, with respect, this is not a serious matter. This is $11,400, I spend more than that on dinner. I came here today because my publicist thought it would be good optics. Frankly, this entire proceeding is a waste of my valuable time." The audience had stopped breathing. Even the bailiff seemed to be holding still in disbelief. Judge Judy leaned back in her chair and a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. The dangerous kind of smile, the kind that her staff had learned to recognize as the precise moment that a defendant's life was about to take a very dramatic turn for the worse. "Mr. Sterling, do you understand that I have the authority to find against you in this case? That I can order you to pay Mrs. Mendoza the full amount plus damages?" Maxwell laughed, actually laughed out loud. "Your Honor, do you understand that I will pay this amount if you order me to pay it, and it will mean absolutely nothing to me? $11,000 is what I tip my pilot at Christmas. You can rule against me, you can rule for me. It does not matter. I will write a check, my driver will drop it in the mail, and by tomorrow morning I will have already forgotten that this proceeding ever happened." Judge Judy's smile widened slightly. "Is that so, Mr. Sterling?" Maxwell leaned forward across his table, and the next words that came out of his mouth would replay 180 million times across every social media platform on earth. He said them with the casual contempt of a man who genuinely believed he was speaking the truth. "Your Honor, I'll buy this entire courtroom if I have to. Make this go away." The 7 words hung in the air like a guillotine blade waiting to fall. The audience gasped audibly. Rosa Mendoza's expression did not change, but a slight tremor moved through her shoulders. The bailiff's hand moved instinctively toward his belt. And Judge Judy Scheindlin, who had been waiting for exactly this kind of moment her entire career, allowed her smile to fully bloom into something terrible, and beautiful, and absolutely merciless. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Judy said slowly, her voice calm and precise, "you just offered to bribe a sitting judge on national television. I'm going to give you exactly one opportunity to retract that statement." Maxwell Sterling, blinded by 30 years of unchallenged power, made the second worst mistake of his life. He doubled down. "Your Honor, please. Don't pretend to be offended. Everyone in this room understands how the world actually works. I'm not offering a bribe, I'm offering to expedite a resolution. Whatever you need, name your price and we can both move on with our day." Judge Judy nodded slowly, almost as if she were considering the offer. She picked up a pen and made a note on her papers. The courtroom was so silent that the soft scratching of her pen sounded like thunder. Then she set down the pen, looked directly at Maxwell Sterling, and said the words that would end his empire. "Mr. Sterling, I'm going to take a brief recess to make a phone call. While I'm gone, I would strongly suggest that you do not leave this courtroom. The bailiff will ensure that you remain seated. We will reconvene in approximately 20 minutes. She rose from the bench with the deliberate calm of a woman who had been preparing for this exact moment for years. She gathered her papers, stepped down from the bench, and walked through the door behind her into her chambers. The courtroom remained in stunned silence. Maxwell Sterling, for the first time since walking through the courtroom doors, seemed to register that something was happening that was not entirely under his control. He glanced at the bailiff, who was now standing directly in front of the courtroom doors with his hand resting on his belt. He glanced at his phone, which he reached for, and discovered had no signal. The studio's electromagnetic shielding was preventing him from making any calls or sending any messages. For the first time in 30 years, Maxwell Sterling could not summon his lawyers, could not contact his fixers, could not deploy the network of influence that had protected him from every previous consequence in his life. He was alone in a chair, with a 58-year-old cleaning lady sitting across from him and a bailiff watching him, and the slow dawning realization that he had perhaps misjudged the situation. In her chambers, Judge Judy picked up the phone. She dialed a number that she had memorized years ago. The phone rang twice before being answered. "Catherine," she said. This is Judith Scheindlin. I have Maxwell Sterling sitting in my courtroom. He just offered to bribe me on national television, and the cameras caught every second of it. How quickly can your team be ready to move? On the other end of the line, federal prosecutor Catherine Walsh, who had been waiting 7 years for exactly this moment, smiled the largest smile she had smiled in a decade. Judith, she said, give me 90 minutes, make sure he doesn't leave that courtroom, and whatever you do, get the bribery offer on tape, one more time. Judge Judy hung up the phone. She made 2 more calls in rapid succession. The first was to a senior agent at the FBI's white-collar crime unit in Manhattan. The second was to an investigator at the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. Both calls lasted less than 3 minutes. By the time Judge Judy walked back into her courtroom, 3 federal agencies were mobilizing teams to converge on Sterling Global Holdings headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, Maxwell Sterling's penthouse on the Upper East Side, and his offshore banking offices in 3 different jurisdictions. Coordinated freezing orders were being prepared for assets across 7 countries. Federal warrants were being signed by a magistrate who had been waiting for years to issue them. And all of this was happening in the time it took Judge Judy to refill her water glass. Judge Judy returned to the bench with the same calm she had left with. She arranged her papers, took a sip of water, and looked at Maxwell Sterling with an expression that he was now finally beginning to read as something other than weakness. Mr. Sterling, she said. Before I render my judgment in this case, I would like to give you one more opportunity to address the offer you made before my recess. Specifically, the offer to pay me money in exchange for ruling in your favor. Would you like to retract that statement now? Maxwell, who had been growing increasingly nervous during the recess, attempted to recover his confidence. Your Honor, I think there may have been a misunderstanding. I was speaking colloquially. I would never actually attempt to influence a judicial proceeding. Judge Judy smiled. So you're telling me, on the record, that the statement "I'll buy this entire courtroom if I have to" was not a serious offer of remuneration in exchange for a favorable ruling? Maxwell nodded vigorously. Exactly, Your Honor, it was a figure of speech. Hyperbole, nothing more. Judge Judy's smile widened. Mr. Sterling, I want to be very clear about something. The cameras in this courtroom are constantly recording. Every word you have said today has been captured on multiple audio and video sources from multiple angles. Your statement has been preserved with absolute clarity. Whether you intended it as a serious bribe attempt or as hyperbole, it does not matter. What matters is that the statement was made in the context of attempting to resolve an active legal proceeding in your favor, and the statement included specific language offering financial inducement in exchange for a ruling. That language meets the legal definition of attempted bribery of a judicial officer under federal law. Maxwell's tan had drained from his face. But that is just the beginning of your problems, Mr. Sterling. Judge Judy reached under her bench and produced a folder that was thicker than any she had displayed during the proceedings. While I was on my recess, I had a brief conversation with several of my professional contacts. By now, federal agents are arriving at your corporate headquarters with warrants to seize your business records. Federal agents are arriving at your residence with warrants to seize your personal records. Federal agents are working with international counterparts to freeze your offshore accounts. The SEC is preparing emergency trading halts on Sterling Global Holdings stock. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division is opening a formal inquiry into 11 years of tax filings. And the FBI is opening a comprehensive investigation into Sterling Global Holdings business practices, including but not limited to the 247 wage theft complaints, the 89 wrongful eviction cases, the systematic use of shell companies to evade taxation, and your relationship with a federal judge who has ruled in your favor on 6 separate matters despite a documented conflict of interest. Maxwell Sterling stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't do this. You don't have this kind of authority. You're a TV judge. The bailiff stepped forward and Maxwell sat back down quickly. Judge Judy waited for him to settle before continuing. Mr. Sterling, you are correct that I do not have the authority to do these things directly. But I have the authority to make phone calls, and as it turns out, the people I called have wanted to investigate you for many years. They have simply been waiting for the right opportunity. You provided that opportunity by offering to bribe a federal eligible witness on national television. Maxwell's voice rose to a near shout. I want my lawyers. I want my lawyers right now. Judge Judy nodded. You will have access to your lawyers shortly. As soon as we conclude these proceedings and federal prosecutor Catherine Walsh and her team arrive to take you into custody on charges of attempted bribery of a judicial officer. The custody is what they call it. I think most people would call it being arrested. Maxwell Sterling, billionaire founder of Sterling Global Holdings, the man who had built an empire on the principle that money could buy any outcome, sat in his designer suit with his platinum phone and his Patek Philippe watch and watched his entire life crumble in real time. He looked like a child whose elaborate sandcastle had just been crushed by an incoming wave that he had absolutely failed to see coming. Judge Judy was not finished. Now, regarding the matter of Mendoza Cleaning Services versus Sterling Global Holdings, my judgment is as follows. I find for the plaintiff. Sterling Global Holdings is ordered to pay Mendoza Cleaning Services the full $11,400 in unpaid invoices, plus interest accumulated over 14 months, plus $50,000 in damages for bad faith withholding of payment, plus $25,000 in damages for emotional distress related to the ongoing harassment, plus attorney fees. The total judgment is approximately $93,000. This judgment will be entered immediately and will be among the first liens placed on your assets when they are frozen, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Mendoza will receive her payment even if everything else you own ends up confiscated. Rosa Mendoza, who had been silent throughout the entire proceeding, allowed a single tear to roll down her cheek. She did not cry from sadness, she cried because for the first time in 5 years, she felt that her late husband Eduardo had been seen, that his life mattered. That justice, real justice, was actually possible in a world that had taught her not to expect it. Judge Judy looked at Rosa with eyes that had softened considerably. Mrs. Mendoza, I want you to know something. Your courage in pursuing this case is the reason that justice will be served not only for you but for hundreds of other small business owners and workers who have been victimized by Sterling Global Holdings. You did not just win a lawsuit today. You triggered the dismantling of an empire built on exploitation. Your husband Eduardo would be very proud of you. Rosa nodded, unable to speak, her hand clutching the small gold cross that had belonged to her mother. The courtroom doors opened and Federal Prosecutor Catherine Walsh entered with 6 FBI agents in suits and 3 IRS investigators. The badges came out, the handcuffs came out. And Maxwell Sterling, who 41 minutes earlier had walked into the courtroom as a billionaire planning to humiliate a cleaning lady on national television, was led out in handcuffs as a federal defendant facing an indictment that would eventually grow to 47 separate charges including bribery of a public official, tax evasion, wire fraud, money laundering, racketeering and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The aftermath of the Sterling case rewrote the financial pages of every major newspaper for the next 6 months. Within 24 hours of the episode airing, Sterling Global Holdings stock had lost 73% of its value in pre-market trading and was halted by the SEC. Within 72 hours, the company had filed for emergency Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Within a week, federal investigators had identified $2.3 billion in assets hidden across 14 shell companies, including yachts, private jets, residential properties, art collections, and offshore bank accounts. Within a month, 3 federal judges had recused themselves from cases involving Sterling Global Holdings, and one of them, the federal judge in the Southern District of New York, who had ruled in Maxwell's favor on 6 separate matters, was placed under investigation by the Judicial Conduct Committee. Maxwell Sterling spent the first night after his arrest in a federal holding facility in Lower Manhattan because no judge would set bail for a man with the resources and demonstrated willingness to flee the country. His 4 ex-wives all gave interviews to major news outlets sharing previously suppressed information about his business practices. His 3 estranged children released a joint statement supporting the federal prosecution and expressing solidarity with the victims of their father's empire. The 207 wage theft complaints that had been buried in regulatory backlogs for years were consolidated into a class action lawsuit that ultimately recovered $340 million for displaced workers. The 89 wrongful eviction cases were reopened, and many of the families who had been forced from their homes received compensation packages averaging $180,000 each. Federal Prosecutor Catherine Walsh, who had been waiting 7 years for the opportunity to dismantle Sterling Global Holdings, was promoted to Deputy Attorney General within 18 months of the case. She kept a framed photograph in her office of Judge Judy Sheindlin on the bench from the Sterling episode with the caption that read simply "one phone call." The episode itself became the highest-rated daytime television broadcast of the year. Clips of Maxwell saying "I'll buy this entire courtroom" were viewed over 180 million times across social media platforms. The 7 words became a meme, a cautionary tale, a teaching example used in business ethics courses at Harvard, Stanford and Wharton. Judge Judy's response, particularly the moment she calmly said "I'm going to take a brief recess to make a phone call," became one of the most studied moments in courtroom television history. Rosa Mendoza received her $93,000 judgment in full, within 60 days of the ruling. She used the money to expand her cleaning business, hire 12 additional workers at fair wages, and establish a small scholarship fund in her late husband Eduardo's name to help the children of low-wage workers attend college. She declined dozens of media interview requests and returned to her work without seeking publicity. When asked by one reporter who managed to reach her at her small Brooklyn office why she did not want to capitalize on her newfound fame, Rosa simply said, "My husband died on that man's floor. I did not want fame, I wanted justice. I have it, that is enough." Maxwell Sterling spent the next 2 years fighting his federal charges with a rotating roster of attorneys, who eventually billed him over $40 million in legal fees. He was ultimately convicted on 38 of the 47 charges and sentenced to 14 years in federal prison. His remaining assets after legal fees, restitution, fines and tax penalties amounted to less than $4 million, a sum that represented less than 0.1% of his pre-arrest net worth. He served his sentence at a medium-security federal facility in Pennsylvania, where he was required to perform mandatory work duties that included, with what many observers noted as poetic justice, cleaning the prison facilities. Judge Judy later said, in an interview, that the Sterling case represented something larger than a single courtroom victory. She said it was a demonstration that no matter how much money a person accumulates, no matter how many lawyers they retain, no matter how many politicians they purchase, the rule of law still has the capacity to function when it is wielded by people with both the willingness and the connections to enforce it. She said that Maxwell Sterling had made a fundamental error that wealthy people often make. He had assumed that because most judges, most prosecutors and most regulators were intimidated by his money, all judges, prosecutors and regulators would be intimidated by his money. He had not understood that some people care more about the law than about money. He had not understood that those people had been waiting for him for years. He had not understood that one phone call from the right person to the right people at the right moment could undo 3 decades of accumulated power in a single afternoon. Judge Judy ended the interview by saying that the most important lesson from the Sterling case was for everyone watching at home. She said that justice is not automatic. Justice requires people who refuse to be intimidated. Justice requires people who do not believe that wealth is a substitute for accountability. Justice requires people like Rosa Mendoza, who walked into a courtroom with $11,400 worth of unpaid invoices and walked out having triggered the largest white-collar prosecution of the decade. And justice sometimes requires nothing more elaborate than a judge picking up a phone and making one call to a federal prosecutor who has been waiting 7 years for that exact phone to ring. If this story restored your faith in the idea that no matter how much money someone has, no matter how powerful they think they are, justice can still find them when the right people decide to act, then I need you to smash that like button right now. Hit it for Rosa Mendoza. Hit it for Eduardo, who died on that lobby floor and was never forgotten by the woman who loved him. Hit it for Catherine Walsh, who waited 7 years for one phone call, and hit it especially for Judge Judy Sheindlin, who proved that the most powerful weapon in any courtroom is not money, but a sitting judge with the right phone numbers and the absolute willingness to use them. Comment one phone call if you believe that no billionaire should ever be above the law. Tell me in the comments what you would have done if you had been in Rosa Mendoza's position. Would you have backed down? Would you have settled? Or would you have walked into that courtroom anyway, just like she did, knowing that some things matter more than money? I want to hear your stories about times you saw justice served against someone who thought they were untouchable, and subscribe right now because you absolutely must see what's coming next. We are covering the case of a tech CEO who tried to use his lawyers to silence a former employee, and Judge Judy revealed evidence in court that resulted in 5 federal indictments before the episode finished airing. Trust me, the Sterling case was just the beginning. Remember the lesson Maxwell Sterling learned the hard way. Money cannot buy everything. Money cannot buy genuine power. Money cannot buy your way out of consequences when a judge with the right phone numbers decides she has finally had enough. Sometimes the most expensive 7 words a billionaire can ever say are "I'll buy this entire courtroom," because those 7 words might just be the words that end his empire. This has been the story of Maxwell Sterling, the billionaire who walked into a small claims court to humiliate a cleaning lady and walked out in handcuffs. Share this video with everyone you know who needs to be reminded that justice is not always swift, but justice is always possible when the right people refuse to look away. Justice is not just served. Sometimes justice is dialed one number, one call, one empire ended.